Hi, everybody. All right, I was looking at the computer. How many of you are on 10 gig and up? All right. I have another question related to, how many of you have entered an ARRL VHF contest or UHF and microwave contest in the last year, let's say? All right, every hand goes up pretty much. And how many of those of you who have, how many of you have actually looked at your log checking reports, your LCR? Okay, less than half. That's okay. So there's some room for learning more about how you can improve. So what I want to do here is, let's see, I'll just advance this way, I guess. Does that move us forward? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to go quickly. When Tony told me we had a shortened time for the forum, I was like, all right, that's cool. I'll stick to the high-level stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give you some really helpful tips for how to improve your logging accuracy. This really applies widely to all contests that you might enter, but particularly for VHF-UHF microwave contests, I think you'll find some things you can take away from this. And even if you take one or two little tips away from this, I think you'll find some helpful things here. So first of all, a little bit of background. Contest logs are cross-checked, and the fundamental reason for that is to ensure that the winners are correctly identified for each category, and also that they're listed, the top scores are listed in the correct order. That's the fundamental thing, right? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera, are actually correct. The people who earned those spots are identified correctly. Software, which is really good at this job, it does the bulk of the work, and then humans inspect the results and dig deeper as needed. And there is always deeper work. It's more of an issue in the HF contests because there is more cheating in HF contests, to be honest. And that requires more human work to detect. But there is still some. I'll tell you that there is inspection required. And sometimes it's because of just anomalous things. I'll give you an example of that. Sometimes people change between UTC and local time, or they start logging in local time and then they change to UTC in the middle of the contest. So you'll see a whole bunch of busted exchanges or busted, actually not in log for like half of the QSOs from a particular station. And then the other half are not. So something obviously is wrong with that person's log. So a human will go and look at that person's log and see what was wrong. And that kind of stuff can be corrected, right? So in a case where you just can't figure out what was wrong with someone's log, it can be marked as unstable and just basically excluded from checking so that all those people they worked don't get dinged. And there is a really strong focus in log checking on not dinging people for what someone who made a mistake on the logging side did wrong. So, for example, if I log all of you with the wrong time zone, I'm off by an hour, right? And all of you log me throughout the course of a contest with the correct time. So all of you would normally get a nil because of that, because our times disagree. You're not going to lose that contact. I'm going to get basically removed from the checking process, so you don't get dinged. But that requires human intervention. So let's talk a little bit about how log submissions actually work. I'll be quick with this. The log submission pages funnel your log to a repository where the log checkers can access them. And then the log checking software pulls logs out of that repository, runs through the whole cross-checking process, and generates scores and statistics and log checking reports and a lot of the tables and data that you see in the results. And it's a really highly refined process now. The software is very good. It's reached a high level of maturity. Most of the ARRL log checking software was created by K1EA initially for HF contests and then has been refined for use in VHF-UHF contests. And some of it's tricky, particularly because of things like rovers. There isn't really an analogous thing for that in HF contests, but it's tricky. Now, headers are added both by your logging software and the log submission page. So the fields that you select, the radio buttons and the drop-downs you select from, those add headers to your log. That's what's used to classify your category, for example. And so that's what gets listed in the results. If you find that you're listed in the incorrect category or location, it's most likely because of something that you did incorrectly in the log submission or in your contest software setup. So that's the first tip that I have for you, is check your work carefully at that stage. When you're setting up your logging software and when you're entering the data into the log submission form, make sure you're selecting the correct stuff so you don't wind up in the wrong ARRL section or the wrong power category or the wrong whatever. You know, there's a lot of different things to choose from, right? The logs are stored then in an immutable repository, and that means that the logs themselves can't be changed after submission. However, they can be replaced before the deadline. So if you discover that you made a mistake in your log submission, when you're reviewing what you've submitted, and lots of people revisit their logs right after they've submitted them, because I particularly like to get my logs in a very timely fashion, but sometimes I'll realize that I made a mistake. Like instead of logging Bob as K2DRH, I might have logged him as K22DRH, right? I might find that when I'm reviewing the log. I'm going to fix that and resubmit the log before the deadline. That log will replace the original log. So I encourage you to just do that manual inspection. Get the log in time, but it's okay to update it too. Okay, so here are some tips, and these are the categories. First of all, planning. How am I doing, Tony?
You're good.
Okay. First of all, this is where we kind of get into specific things for VHF-UHF contests. Know who's going to be on and where. Use your local club as a resource. This applies very widely to VHF-UHF contests at 2 meters and above. You probably have a very good idea. How many of you in the room have been on the air for more than 20 years? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So you probably have a really good idea, a mental map of call signs and grids in your brain, right? And you know who's going to be on. So, use that information. This is part of my point, right? The logging errors that we see are largely avoidable because you already know who you're going to work or who's possible to work and what grid they're in. That's the whole thing. That's all we log, right? Is who's on, what their call sign is, and what grid they're in. And it's a little tougher in the 10 gig contest because people move around. Now you've got 6-digit grids in play as well. But there's a whole list, thanks to guys like K1RZ up here, of published plans that people make, right? Where they're going to be active. So you really don't, and you're also talking to people frequently before you work them. You know where they are, right? So make sure you log them correctly. Anyway, planning is important. Make a checklist with calls and grids. When I go out roving, I have a sheet of people who I plan to work. When I go, when I land at a spot, I'm going to call these people in this order, let them know where I am, and I do it by order of priority, the people who I know are going to be loud and fast, the ones who I can get through quickly, right? And it has their call and their grid and the bands that they're on. And then I bang down through that list. And then I start calling CQ because I want to make queues with all those people. So I want to make absolutely sure that I log their calls and grids correctly. That's the kind of checklist I mean. Announce your own plans, particularly if you're a rover or portable. So other people will be more likely to log you correctly. That's really important. A little anecdote on this. And Mike, N2MG, in the back of the room knows this story. There's a guy in New England, I won't name his call, but 2 years in a row, he gave me a nil on 24 gigahertz. Didn't log me, right? I worked him, didn't log me. We went from 10 gig where we worked to 24 gig where we worked, and then onward. And he nilled me twice on 24 gig. So now, every time, and it wasn't you, Tom, every time that I log him now, I ask him, did you log me before we move on to 47 gig? Do you have me in the log? And it taught me a couple things. One of them is slow down a little bit. You know, I'm an HF contester, so I'm used to you work the guy, you move on, bang, 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 right? A lot of VHF, UHF people are not that good at moving fast. So, you know, you have to know your people you're working and be patient. And make sure that, you know, they get you in the log, because you will lose that QSO and you will lose that multiplier. And you can avoid that. So know your audience, right? Announcing your plans helps with that, helps other people know. 6 meters is the wild card when the band is open. So know your audience. Next. Almost all logging errors are preventable. We've talked about this. You know the other person's call and grid 90% of the time or more. There's some bold stuff here you can take away. Most errors are careless typos or copying errors made when you already know the correct information. We see a lot of grid transpositions, right? EN90 becomes EN09, for example, right? That kind of thing. And because of the way logging software works, it just loves to help you save work by propagating those errors into future QSOs you make with that station on other bands, right? So if you log the person incorrectly and when you work them on 6 meters and then you move to 2 meters, it's going to pre-fill that for you. You're going to lose every QSO you made with that station. So make sure you're laughing, Raj, because you know, right? Yeah, been there, done that. We've all done that, right? So be very careful with that kind of stuff. And this is especially true if you're keying in a log after the contest. So if you've been out portable or roving and you're logging on paper and you come back and you're typing logs into the computer, this is where we see a lot of these errors come in. Next, make sure the other person has your information. I already told you that story. So keep that stuff from propagating. Real-time versus offline logging. I recommend logging in real time, and I like N1MM for this because it's, well, number one, it's free. It supports every contest. There are other loggers that other people like to use. One of the popular ones is N3FJP because it's really simple. It's not free, but it does have really good support for the ARRL VHF-UHF contests. The reason I recommend using a computer log is because you're not having to transpose or transcribe that log later from paper onto a computer, okay? So I realize that's not always practical, but be very careful when you're keying your log in. So this is probably, the tips on this page are probably where the biggest source of errors are, or sources. So good things to take away here. Oh, did I do that too fast for you? Did I move on? All right, sorry about that. I'll come back to it. Next, check your contest program setup. Make sure your category, power, location are correct. There's a bunch of things in there. Get your login before the deadline and resist the temptation. This is really important, okay? Resist the temptation to share log information with other stations before the log deadline with the intent to fill in or correct log data before submitting. This is known as log washing, and it violates the intent of the competition. So a lot of people do this, think it's harmless, and I understand that. I'll leave it at that. You know, if you're competing for an award, you're really competing, it's you, right? You're the competitor. It's not a crowdsourced thing. Tony, 5, thank you. So resist that temptation. And that makes it more important for you to get it right in the competition, okay? After the log submission, go to the logs receive page for the sponsor, in this case the league. You know, they have a logs receive page for every contest. Make sure that you see your call sign on the list. Check your email and review the robot message. Make sure that, look down through it and make sure that it actually accepted your log, because that's going to tell you that. If you find errors after the submission, again, go back and resubmit the log, fix them, and resubmit before the deadline. A courtesy tip here, post your score to 3830scores.com with a little write-up. Everybody likes to read what other people's experiences were like, and 3830scores.com is the place for that. So, it's really interesting. That's where you get to add some color about your operation, and people really like that. After the results are published, make sure you go to the league's website, download your LCR, your log checking report, and it will have a detailed breakdown of all of the things that were removed from your score and why. For example, if I work somebody and they didn't log me, it'll tell me that. It'll show up as a nil or not in log, right? If I made a call sign copying error or if I copied somebody's exchange incorrectly, it'll tell me that. And it'll tell me how many points I lost for each one of those things. It'll also tell me how many errors I caused in other people's logs and why. So for example, if I made a mistake like I was sending the incorrect exchange or I was sending an exchange that doesn't match what I have in my log, it'll tell me that. That's really a bad error to make, by the way. I did that once. I was out portable in a location, I made a few contacts, and I was sending the correct grid, but when I submitted my log, I had put a typo. I had sent FN20, I put FN21 in my log instead of FN20, where I actually was in FN20. So all those people lost those contacts, and I felt like an absolute heel, which I guess is why my last name is Healy. Anyway, so I think we're pretty much there. Final comments. Pay attention to your details, category location, sent grid, copied call and exchange. Make sure you're not propagating errors as you're typing in your log. Learn from your LCRs and always seek to improve and watch your scores grow. I will point out that you'll see in the 10 gig contest results, I always talk about logging accuracy and statistics. Over the last 4 years, we've seen error rates consistently improve. And I would like to think that the fact that I'm talking about this stuff and the results is helping with that. I'm sure that some of it is just people are learning to use the tools. But I thought I would kind of touch on these topics for you to kind of help you with a few things to focus on, to help you improve your logging accuracy, and I hope you find this useful. We don't really have time for questions because of the short window here, but thanks for the opportunity to talk with you, and I'll be around afterward if you have any questions. Thanks.